The quiet panic. This is something that's been eating at me for weeks now, and I honestly don't know if I should even be telling you this story. But after what happened, I can't keep it to myself anymore. I run a small photo restoration business out of my apartment, and last month I received a package that changed everything I thought I knew about my work. It was a typical Tuesday morning when the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting any deliveries, but there it was. A plain brown package with no return address, just my name scrawled in faded ink. Inside was an old shoebox filled with dozens of black and white photographs, most of them cracked and yellowed with age. There was also a handwritten note that simply said, "Please restore these, payment enclosed." Sure enough, there were 5 crisp $100 bills tucked underneath. Now, I've been doing photo restoration for about 3 years. It started as a side hustle when I was in college, but after graduation I couldn't find anything in my field, so I decided to make it my full-time gig. I've worked on thousands of old photographs, family portraits, wedding pictures, military photos from World War II. You name it, I've probably restored it. But this batch felt different from the moment I opened that box. The photos were old, probably from the 1940s or 50s based on the clothing and cars I could make out. Most showed what appeared to be the same family: a man, a woman, and 2 young children. They looked happy in most of the pictures, typical family shots from that era. Nothing seemed unusual at first glance, just normal wear and tear from decades of storage. I set up my usual workspace, cleared my desk, and got my equipment ready. For those who don't know how photo restoration works, it's basically digital archaeology. I scan each photograph at an extremely high resolution, then use specialized software to repair tears, remove stains, and bring back faded details that have been lost to time. It's meticulous work that requires patience and a steady hand. But there's something incredibly satisfying about bringing these old memories back to life. I decided to start with what looked like the easiest ones first. A few family portraits that just needed some basic cleaning and color correction. The scanning process went smoothly, and within a couple of hours I had digital copies of about 10 photographs loaded into my restoration software. That's when I noticed something strange about one particular image. It was a photo of the family standing in front of what looked like their house. The father had his arm around the mother's shoulders, and the 2 kids were standing in front of them, probably around 8 and 10 years old. At first glance, it seemed like a perfectly normal family photo. But as I zoomed in to work on some scratches near the bottom of the image, I saw something that made my blood run cold. There was a shadow in one of the upstairs windows of the house. Not just any shadow. It was clearly the silhouette of a person standing there watching. But here's the thing that really freaked me out. None of the family members in the photo were looking up at that window. They were all smiling at the camera, completely oblivious to whoever was lurking above them. I tried to tell myself it was probably just another family member who happened to be inside at the time. Maybe a grandparent or an older sibling who didn't want to be in the picture. But something about the way the figure was positioned, pressed right up against the glass, felt predatory. It gave me chills. I pushed the unsettling feeling aside and continued working. Over the next few days, I methodically restored each photograph, and with every image I completed, that sense of unease grew stronger. There were subtle details that I hadn't noticed during my initial examination. Details that only became clear once I enhanced the contrast and sharpened the resolution. In several of the outdoor photos, there were glimpses of the same figure lurking in the background. Sometimes it was just a partial silhouette behind a tree. Other times it was a face barely visible in the shadows of a doorway. Always watching, always hidden, but definitely there. The family in the photographs never seemed to notice, but this mysterious observer was present in at least half of the images. The more I worked on these photos, the more obsessed I became with figuring out who this person was. I started staying up late, poring over every detail, adjusting the brightness and contrast to try to get a clearer look at the face. My girlfriend Sarah started complaining that I was spending too much time on this project, that I was becoming withdrawn and paranoid. She wasn't wrong, but I couldn't help myself. Then came the photo that changed everything. It was near the bottom of the box, one of the last ones I scanned. Unlike the others, this one was in remarkably good condition, almost like it had been protected somehow. It showed the family at what appeared to be a birthday party for one of the children. There were balloons, a cake, and everyone was gathered around the dining room table. But as I began the restoration process, something impossible happened. I was working on removing a small stain from the corner of the image when I noticed the digital file had somehow changed. The stain I was trying to remove had grown larger, and it had taken on a distinctly reddish hue. I thought it was a glitch in my software, so I closed the program and reopened it. The red stain was still there, but now it was even bigger. And as I watched in horror, it began to spread across the photograph like spilled blood. Within minutes, it had consumed nearly half of the image, turning what had been a joyful birthday celebration into something that looked like a crime scene. I immediately saved my work and backed away from the computer. My hands were shaking as I tried to rationalize what I had just witnessed. Digital files don't spontaneously corrupt like that, especially not in such a specific and disturbing way. But there was no other explanation for what I had seen. That night, I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that red stain spreading across the photograph like a living thing. I kept telling myself it was just a computer glitch, that there had to be a logical explanation. But deep down, I knew something was seriously wrong with this entire situation. The next morning, I decided to call the phone number that had been included with the package, hoping to speak with whoever had sent me these photographs. Maybe they could provide some context, some explanation for what I was experiencing. But when I dialed the number, I got a recording saying it had been disconnected. I tried looking up the return address, but it led to a vacant lot on the other side of town. There was no house, no business, nothing but empty space where someone should have been living. Whoever had sent me these photographs had covered their tracks completely. Despite every instinct telling me to stop, I found myself drawn back to my computer. I had to know what would happen if I continued working on that blood-stained photograph. As a professional, I felt obligated to complete the job I had been paid to do. But as a human being, I was terrified of what I might discover. When I opened the file again, the red stain had spread even further. It now covered almost the entire image, obscuring the faces of the family members and turning their celebration into something nightmarish. But in the areas where the stain was thickest, I could make out shapes that definitely hadn't been there before. They looked like handprints. I stared at my screen in complete disbelief. Bloody handprints were now clearly visible across the photograph, as if someone had pressed their hands against the image from the inside. The birthday cake was barely visible through the crimson mess, and the children's faces had been completely obscured by what looked like fresh blood. I grabbed my phone and called Sarah, my voice shaking as I tried to explain what was happening. She thought I was having some kind of breakdown, that the stress of working alone for so long had finally gotten to me. But when she came over and saw the photograph for herself, her face went white. She couldn't explain it either. That's when I made the decision to research the family and the photographs. If I could figure out who they were, maybe I could understand what had happened to them and why these images were behaving so strangely. I spent hours scouring old newspaper archives and public records, using the house in the background as my starting point. What I found made my stomach drop. The family had lived in that house from 1947 to 1952. The father was Robert Chen, the mother was Margaret, and their children were Tommy and Susan. On December 15th, 1952, all 4 family members were found dead in their home. They had been murdered. According to the police reports I managed to dig up, the killer was never caught. The crime scene was described as particularly brutal, with blood found throughout the house. The investigators noted that whoever committed the murders had apparently been watching the family for weeks, maybe months, before striking. Neighbors reported seeing a suspicious figure lurking around the property on multiple occasions. But here's what really sent chills down my spine. The murders had taken place on Tommy's 10th birthday, the same birthday party I had been trying to restore in that photograph. I immediately understood that the mysterious figure I had been seeing in all the other photos wasn't just some random person. It was their killer, stalking them, learning their routines, planning his attack. And somehow, through these photographs, I was witnessing his surveillance of this innocent family. Yabala. The next few days were absolute hell. Every time I tried to work on the photographs, they would become more disturbed and corrupted. Blood would appear on images that had been perfectly normal just hours before. Faces would change expressions when I wasn't looking directly at them. The figure in the shadows seemed to move from photo to photo, getting closer to the family with each image. Sarah begged me to throw the photographs away, to burn them if necessary, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Those images were the only record of this family's final weeks alive. Despite everything that was happening, I felt like I owed it to them to preserve their memory properly. On the 7th night after I started the project, I woke up around 3 in the morning to find my computer screen glowing in the darkness. I had shut it down before going to bed, I was certain of that. But there it was, displaying the birthday party photograph in all its blood-soaked horror. As I approached the screen, I noticed something new. The red stains were moving, actually flowing like liquid across the digital image. And in the center of the photograph, where the birthday cake should have been, words were appearing written in what looked like blood. "You've seen too much." I slammed the laptop shut and grabbed my phone, ready to call the police. But what would I tell them? That a 70-year-old murder case was somehow manifesting through digital photographs? They would think I was insane. Instead, I did something that probably saved my life. I gathered every single photograph from that box along with all my digital files and backup drives and drove to the cemetery where the Chen family was buried. It took me 2 hours to find their graves in the pre-dawn darkness, but eventually I located 4 small headstones clustered together in the older section of the cemetery. I knelt down beside their graves and spoke to them directly, explaining that I had tried to restore their photographs, but that something evil was preventing me from completing the work. I told them I was sorry for what had happened to them, that they deserved better than the brutal end they had received. Then I buried the original photographs right there beside their graves, along with my hard drives containing all the digital copies. As I covered them with soil, I felt a sense of peace wash over me that I hadn't experienced in weeks. The oppressive feeling that had been following me around finally lifted. When I got home, I discovered that my laptop had somehow been wiped completely clean. Every file, every program, everything was gone. It was as if the computer had been reset to factory settings. But strangely, I wasn't upset about it. I felt relieved. I never heard from whoever sent me those photographs. The $500 they had paid me went toward a new computer and a fresh start for my business. But I've never forgotten what happened during those terrifying weeks, and I've never taken on another restoration project without thoroughly researching the history behind the images first. Sometimes late at night, I still think about that mysterious figure lurking in the shadows of those old photographs. I wonder if he was somehow trapped in those images, reliving his crimes over and over again. Maybe by burying the photographs with his victims, I finally gave them all the peace they deserved. What I learned from this experience is that some memories are too dark to be preserved. Some stories are meant to stay buried, and some photographs should never be restored. The past doesn't always want to be brought back to life, and sometimes it's better to let sleeping ghosts lie. I still run my photo restoration business, but now I'm much more careful about the projects I accept. And if I ever receive another unmarked package with no return address, I'm taking it straight to the police. Some things are just too dangerous to handle alone.